people can learn only a small part of what humanity, what archaeology, paleontology, and geology can teach us is very limited. Furthermore, everything built on external evidence is unreliable. One need only consider how the picture of an event or people not so very remote from us changes as new historical evidence is uncovered. One need only compare the descriptions of one and the same event by different historians to realize on what uncertain ground we stand in these matters. Everything belonging to the external world of the senses is subject to time. In addition, time destroys what has originated in time. On the other hand, external history is dependent on what has been preserved in time. We cannot say that the essential element has been preserved if we remain content with the external evidence. But everything which comes into being in time has its origin in the eternal, though the eternal is not accessible to sensory perception. Nevertheless, the ways to the perception of the eternal are open for human beings. They can develop forces dormant in them in order to recognize the eternal. This development is referred to in the book ILOFO Know the Higher Worlds. These studies also show that at a certain high level of cognition, a person can penetrate to the eternal origins of those things which vanish with time. People have broadened their powers of cognition in this way when they are no longer limited to external evidence, as far as no edge of the past is concerned. Then they can see in events that part which is not perceptible to the senses, which time cannot destroy. They penetrate from transitory to non-transitory history. It is a fact that this history is written in other characters than is ordinary history. In occult knowledge and theosophy it is called the Akashic Record. Only a faint idea of this chronicle can be given in our language. For our language corresponds to the world of the senses. The things which are described by our language at once receive the character of this sense world. To the uninitiated, who cannot yet convince themselves of the reality of a separate spiritual world through their own experiencer, the initiate can easily appear to be a visionary, if not something worse. People who have acquired the ability to perceive in the spiritual world come to know past events in their eternal character. Such events do not stand before them like the dead testimony of history, but appear in full life. It is almost as if what has happened takes place for them. Those initiated into the reading of such a living script can look back into a much more remote past than is represented by external history, and, on the basis of direct spiritual perception, they can also describe much more reliably the things of which history tells. In order to avoid possible misunderstanding, it should be said that spiritual perception is not infallible. This perception also can err, can see in an inexact, oblique, wrong manner. No one is free from error in this field, no matter how high they stand. Therefore one should not complain when the communications of spiritual sources do not always entirely correspond. But the dependability of observation is much greater here than in the external world of the senses. What various initiates can relate about history and prehistory will essentially be in agreement. Such a history and prehistory does in fact exist in all mystery schools. For millennia, agreement has been so complete here that the conformity existing among external historians of even a single century cannot be compared with it. The initiates describe essentially the same things at all times and in all places. Several chapters from the Akashic Record will follow this introduction. First, those events will be described which took place when the so-called Atlantean continent still existed between America and Europe. This part of the Earth's surface was once land. Today it forms the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. Plato tells of the last remnant of this land, the island of Poseidones, which lay westward of Europe and Africa. The story O.J. Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria by what Eliot describes how the floor of the Atlantic Ocean was once a continent, how for about 1 million years it was the scene of a civilization which, to be sure, was quite different from our modern ones. And the fact that the last remnants of this continent sank in the 10th millennium i.e. present book is intended to provide information which will supplement Scott Eliot's description, while he tends to describe the external events among our Atlantean ancestors. The aim here is to record some details concerning their spiritual character, and the inner nature of the conditions under which they lived. Therefore, the reader must go back in imagination to a period which lies almost 10,000 years in the past, and which lasted for many millennia. What is described here, however, did not take place only on the continent now covered by the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, but also in the neighboring regions of what today is Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. What took place in these regions later developed from this earlier civilization. The moving continents, we know that the Earth is never at rest. We know that it is in a perpetual state of interchange and movement. It will be remembered from the description given of the Akashic record that the external aspect of the Earth today is quite different from the aspect it presented, for example, at the time we call the Atlantean epoch. In this primeval epoch, the part of the surface of the Earth which today is covered by the Atlantic Ocean was a mighty continent, while where Europe, Asia, and Africa are now situated, scarcely any continents were as yet formed. Thus the solid matter, the substance, of the Earth has been transformed by its inner motion. The planet Earth is in a continual state of inner motion. Consider, for instance, that what we know today as the island of Heligoland is but a small part of that land which in the 9th and 10th centuries still projected out into the sea. The periods during which interchanges alter the Earth's surface are comparatively great, yet even without going deeply into these matters we can see that our planet is in perpetual inner motion. Indeed, if we do not merely include the solid Earth in the planet, but also the water and the air, then it is apparent in daily life that the planet is in inner motion, in the formation of clouds and rain, in all the phenomena of atmospheric conditions, in the rise and fall of the water. In all these we see the inner mobility of the planetary substance. That is the life process of the planet. Just as the etheric body works in the life of the individual, so do what we designate as the spirits of motion work in the life of the planet. We may therefore say, the external form of the planet is the creation of the spirits of form. The vitality is regulated by the beings we call the spirits of motion,